My name is Jeffrey Lancaster, so thank you all for sticking around for this session. Today I'm going to talk about some tools and workflows that I think are going to be useful to people who are actually doing research. So let me get an idea of who's in the audience. How many people here are active researchers? Wonderful. How many people here support research in one form or another? That's fantastic. How many people would consider themselves expert technology users? Good. How many people would consider themselves novice technology users? Wonderful. How many people think they fall somewhere in the middle, like, you know some stuff, but okay, that's fantastic. So because Sri had a bit.ly to his presentation, I made a bit.ly to my presentation. So if you need to tweet this, it's JRL, which are my initials, and then NME 2013. The other thing I want to tell you just before we get started is that for all of the things that I'm going to show you today, I have a handout at the end. So if you don't write everything down or if you don't catch everything, you'll be able to take that back and actually have web addresses to everything that I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about what research is for a second, assuming that this works. So this is a slide about the role of literature in research. So let's say that research starts out with an idea. It's either a big idea or a small idea. And then you start to ask a couple of questions about it. You say, is that a novel idea? Is it useful? Does it have applications? That's big if anybody here is looking at NSF guidelines and things like that. Is it plausible? Is this something we could actually carry out? And so literature is one of those things that helps us get from the idea to an actual research plan. Now, once we have a research plan, then we have to pay for it, right? So we're going to apply for grants. And that grant is hopefully going to give us enough funding to do what we need. But to write the grant, now you have to have a little bit of background, right? And that's where literature fits in. And in the funding, you have to give some justification for why what you're doing is interesting, why it's novel, why nobody's done it before. And once you get that justification, then you can use that funding to hopefully pay for people, right? Those are going to be students, those are going to be researchers, maybe additional equipment, things like that. And once you've got those students and researchers in place, then you need to get those students and researchers up to speed on whatever the topic is, whatever that idea is. This is obviously simplified and a lot of other stuff could go on here, but a PowerPoint slide is only so big. So now from the research plan, I'm coming from the sciences. So then you go into experiments. Experiments can either be methodological experiments, maybe it's just a thought experiment, you know, if you're doing philosophy, something like that. But within that experiment, you've got some background. So I call that protocols and reagents, coming from chemistry. But where are you finding those things? You're finding those things in literature, right? And so once you have those experiments, you analyze the results of those experiments. And now we start to fill in this entire conversation aspect of, you know, when you're going to publish what your work is. Either looking for confirmation, discussion, data analysis, conference talks, things like that. And so then from that analysis, then we go to publish. And when we publish, we need that background justification. And there are lots of different kinds of things we could publish. We can do articles, we can do patents, we could do books, we could do theses, we could do lots of different stuff. And so I kind of include that, as the output, still literature, but output. And then once we publish, now we start to look for more funding. Maybe we want to go get a job, something like that. So that sort of closes up the loop of analysis. But then once we have that, then we ask additional questions based on that research. And now we've got new knowledge and new questions, and we can go back to the idea phase. And so we can cycle through that entire thing again and again and again, right? So as a sort of workflow, that's what we're up against. Now, researchers, I think, spend a lot of time doing parts of this that are not the really meaty parts. They're not thinking a lot, or they're not doing a lot of those experiments, but they're sort of doing the background review, or they have to write a literature review, or they have to search, or they have to figure out how to format their article. All of these things that, given the state of technology, these things could actually be a lot easier. And so today what I'm going to tell you about are some tools that I think fit into how to make these things a lot easier, so that you can spend time doing the things that you actually should be spending time doing, and not on either clerical or formatting or other pieces of your job. I see people nodding, which means, yeah, I do that a lot, right? Okay, so I'm going to take a sort of case study approach. So I've got 5 cases that I want to talk about. First of all, a researcher has a lot of papers that they need to read, and they commute. And so they've got a lot of free time on the train, but they're either stuck with printouts or PDFs. So what is a tool that maybe they can use to expedite that workflow of actually reading, gaining new knowledge? The second piece is you want to collaboratively curate sort of a list of new articles that when somebody comes into the group or when somebody joins your research, that they can actually read. The third one, a researcher needs to quickly make an annotated bibliography, and you've got a folder full of PDFs. So how do you transfer that folder full of PDFs into, boom, an annotated bibliography? I'm going to show you something that ought to take less than a minute if my computer actually works. Case study number 4, a researcher wants to use social media, but to satisfy some sort of broader impact requirement, but you don't have time for Facebook, or you only use it for like your grandkids, something like that. You don't have time to blog, you don't get Twitter, so what can you actually do that might satisfy this requirement, but is sort of a low impact alternative? And then sort of answering the question of why you would even want to bother. And then case study number 5, you want to get credit for work that you've done that hasn't been published. And I include published in quotes here to mean a very specific thing. It hasn't been signed over to a publisher and included either in a book or a journal. Okay? There are new things now that we can talk about what it means to publish. So I'm going to mention some of those. And these things are going to be useful to the scientific community in a particular way. Maybe it's a failed experiment, right? People aren't used to saying I did something and it didn't work. But that could potentially save somebody else a whole lot of time. So where can we actually leverage the power of technology to deal with that question? So I was on the train the other day, and I was that creepy guy taking pictures of people on the train. But there were these 3 people right next to me, and they were all, even though the picture is cut, it's because I couldn't get a decent picture of the 3 of them. And I found it really interesting. This guy's reading a journal, like a printed paper journal. And so this was something that's coming from a publisher. I think it was like the New Yorker or something like that. Now, this woman had printed out a lot of things, I guess for her class or something like that. And she was flipping through and trying to manage all of these different pages, some of which were stapled, some of which weren't. And then this girl was reading something on her device, on her personal device. And so this is kind of the trend that we've seen. So anybody who's still either using print journals, printing things out for themselves, because maybe you like to mark it up. Maybe you're used to highlighting things and making notes in marginalia. Maybe one day that marginalia will get archived if anybody was in the Hacking the Archive section. So what can we do to sort of expedite this workflow? So the first thing I want to tell you about is called Pocket. It used to be called Read It Later. I have found, this is my new favorite thing, honestly, which is kind of why I put it first. And what it does is when I get to the office in the morning, one of the things that I do, and maybe you're like me, I open up a lot of different web pages. I open up a lot of blog posts that people have either tweeted. I open up things from news feeds, and I end up having 15 or 20 tabs open in my browser, and then I get distracted. And at the end of the day, I kind of come back to those tabs and I say, yeah, I never got around to that. But I want to save those things. I don't want to, sit there for the next hour actually reading through them necessarily because I want to leave. But I don't want them to go anywhere. So how can I hang on to those things to actually read them? So Pocket is both a web interface and, in this case, an iPhone interface. I think they also have an Android app as well. And so let me show you actually how this works. So in Safari, I've gone to this Huffington Post article that I really like, but I don't have time to read through it. We'll see if my computer actually cooperates right now. Okay. Anyway, in the Safari, I think I'm going to do without that. In Safari, what you'll notice is there are 2, oh, there we go. Okay. I have kind of an old computer, and this is almost the limit of what it can handle. So there's this article, and I want to save it for later, and I want to clean it up, and I want to make it pretty. I don't want all the advertising. I don't want the Huffington Post wrapper all the way around it. And so what you'll notice is there are 2 things on here. Up in my bookmarks, there's something that says To Pocket. So there's a bookmarklet. This is a little JavaScript that from the website you can drag up into your browser window right here. And if I were to click on this, what it does is it now says Saving to Pocket. And now that page has been saved, cleaned up, reformatted, very pretty and very nice. It didn't bring all of the crud along with it. Sorry, my computer keeps freezing. There's also another button that you could do that would bring it back up into there. And so what it's done, I brought an adapter for my phone, but take my word for it. What it's done, it's now added it to my account so that whenever I go, it's going to sync with the cloud my cloud account, and it's going to pull down all that information, and so now I can read that on my phone whenever I want to. All right. So it's associated with me because I've already put in my contact information into that bookmarklet, so it knows that it's coming from me when it goes to save it. They always say you have to figure out what your plan B is when, if your computer stops working. So let's come back into PowerPoint. So Pocket has been one of my favorite things. And what it allows you to do is to keep all of those things, and it'll keep a list, both of things that you haven't read, and then once you've read it and you check it off, it's going to store it into an archive for you. Now, the next thing that I'm going to tell you about, I'm just going to keep going because we'll see when my computer wants to cooperate. The next thing I'm going to tell you about is actually called Mendeley. And Mendeley had a booth in the sponsor fair. Some of you may have stopped by. Mendeley was one of my new favorite things a few years ago. But I stopped actively doing research, and so I'm not going through as many sort of scholarly articles anymore. And what Mendeley can do is Mendeley is very similar to iTunes, or their sort of business model was Last.fm. And so what it lets you do is to drag PDFs into Mendeley. It will parse the metadata for you. So it will pull out who the author is, what journal it is, what page numbers that article is, the DOI number, maybe the abstract. All right, let's see if this works. And so what we can do then, sorry, my computer's just not happy, I think, maybe pushing and being screen captured. So what I want to do then, so you can basically take those PDFs, once this gets around to it, and you can drag them into this, and it will parse out all of that metadata. All right, let's see if that helps. All right, so I've got a folder on my desktop of PDFs. I'm going to minimize this and maybe go on without it. And so what I can do is I will just drag and drop those PDFs into Mendeley. It will parse out all of the information, and then it will basically automatically populate this database that then when I go to cite those articles, or when I go to make a bibliography, all of that information is there, and I didn't have to do any of it. Ooh, computer's really unhappy now. All right, so we'll see what happens with that. So I'll demo that for you in a second. Moving on, the second case study. Somebody wants to collaborate with their students. One of the neatest things I've found lately is called If This Then That. And they have a website, IFTTT.com. If you've been to it, I see some people nodding their head. Okay. So the first piece of sort of curating this list relies on what's called RSS, which stands for Really Simple Syndication. Kind of been in the news lately for a number of other reasons. But what it's going to do is it's going to take a website, and it's going to format the content of that website in a particular way that is machine readable. So it's very simple to actually communicate to other devices or to other applications. And so once you have an RSS feed, what you need is an RSS reader. I have a preference for Google Reader. So that's the one that I choose. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the articles. You'll notice on the top there's an article about Professor Klaus Lackner, and it's going to reformat it in a particular way that's going to let me either read it, check off if I've read it, apply tags to it, and keep track of it. And so another RSS reader that I really like is called Flipboard. This is another one for your phone. I see people nodding again like it's a good one. That's sort of the validation that I made good choices. So Flipboard is nice because it's going to take this RSS feed and turn it into like the prettiest user experience you could possibly imagine. Really nice fonts, very clean, very easy to read. And so also like handles pictures really well, which is nice, especially when you're reading different content. And so showing you how you get from the web via RSS to an RSS reader, the next step in this process is actually to get it into Google Drive. So Google Drive is what Google Docs became. They sort of rebranded it. But so it's documents, spreadsheets, forms, lots of different things. And so to do that, you use this If This Then That service. And what IFTTT does is it ties together all of these different channels. So for instance, if there's a particular trigger on one of these channels, then an action will happen on another one of these channels. Some examples. If I post to Facebook, then I also post to Twitter. So now instead of managing two different social media platforms, I can just manage the one, set up a rule, and then like the great sage Ron Popeil said, you set it and forget it. People remember that? No? Okay. I watch a lot of infomercials, I guess. If I check in at the airport, email mom and dad. So I can set up a rule for that. If I star an RSS item in my reader, then I want you to add it to a draft post in another service. Or if I tag an item, I want to add it to a Google Doc. And this last one is the one that you can use to develop this collaborative bibliography. The way they represent them, we can tie all of these services together. Now on If This Then That, they have a whole bunch of different services that are tied together, everything from RSS readers to weather apps to stock apps. So another one that's nice is if it's going to rain, send me a text telling me not to forget my umbrella, right? Or you can tie together Evernote, lots of different possibilities and combinations, and there's a community on IFTTT. It's free. All you're basically doing is you're tying together all of these other services to put the internet to work for you. I think that's their slogan. And then what's also nice is that if you're looking kind of for what apps should I know about, where's a place that's collected a lot of ones together for me to look at, this is a great place to go. They have sort of short descriptions of what each one of these is. Very good place to get started if you're looking to simplify workflows. And so IFTTT uses APIs. APIs are application programmer interfaces. And what that does is this is the way that these applications can talk to each other. It's a way that you can query the information from one service. So for instance, I'm showing you here my list of friends on Facebook. And it's in a format called JSON, which is a JavaScript object format. And basically that lets me get from Facebook, and I could take that and I could embed it in another website, reformat it, do particular things with that information. And so the APIs tied together allow us to get from web content into adding a new line on a spreadsheet. So I'll show you that one at the end, if that's okay if I can punt on that, because I'm not sure my computer's too happy. So case study number 3. I'm going to quickly make an annotated bibliography of PDFs. I'll show you this one at the end too. But you can see all of the different areas that this fits in. That's very important for patents. It's very important for a thesis because you have to show what prior art there is in a thesis. You have to prove that you know what's happened in that field up to the point before you even start contributing whatever your original scholarship is. It's also obviously very important in the learning and up to speed pieces. Again, to do this, I used Mendeley. I actually used a new tool that Mendeley has added that Columbia University Libraries developed in cooperation with Mendeley, which is a citation style language editor. And what that lets you do is that lets you make your own style. So it's not changing the information that's in that database, but it's allowing you to represent that information in any way you want to. So what I'm going to show you in a little bit, and this was one of my wow moments, is where when I pulled in that information, it also parsed out the abstract of each one of those PDFs. And now I can make a style that says, okay, take my American Chemical Society style, because that's what I like using, and then put the abstract that's already attached in metadata on the paper, just stick it right under it. So I can take the 6 PDFs that I'm going to show you, drag them into Mendeley, copy them out of Mendeley, paste them in a Word document, and boom, I have an annotated bibliography. It's pretty amazing. It's a wow moment. So I'll show you that in a bit. Case study number 4. A researcher wants to use social media but doesn't think they really have time to blog, to tweet, to do all these other things. All right? There are a lot of different social media platforms. So many now that you ought to recognize, hopefully the Facebook icon, the Twitter icon, LinkedIn, WordPress is a platform for blogging. Instagram is a newer one but is very popular, and then we heard about YouTube in some of the other sessions today. Well, add into that, these are kind of popular ones, right? Add into that all of the different science ones, which I'll do in a second. So if anybody's looking for an explanation, this was a meme that went around a little while ago. Twitter, I'm eating a donut. Facebook, I like donuts. Foursquare, this is where I eat donuts. Instagram, here's a vintage photo of my donut. YouTube, here I am eating a donut. LinkedIn, my skills include donut eating. Pinterest, here's a donut recipe. Last.fm, now listening to donuts. And Google+, I'm a Google employee who eats donuts. It's amazing how true a lot of that still is. So you might choose to use a platform for different reasons, but when we add in all of these now scientific social platforms, or humanities social platforms, or social sciences social platforms, how are you to know which one to choose and which one you really ought to put your time and effort into? Later, toward the end, I'm going to talk about what's in the blue box over here as some that everybody ought to know about, and these are going to be things like ORCID and Researcher ID, but we'll get to those in a bit. Okay. So this fits into a number of areas. The reason why you might want to get involved in social networks has more to do with being an active member of your community than it does being on there just for the sake of being on there. And if you look at how many areas I've highlighted of that original diagram that can touch on social media, everything from finding out about grants, doing broader impact for grants, learning about students, researchers, collaborators, getting up to speed on a topic. If I start to follow an expert in the field, I can find out really quickly what the major issues in that field are. All the way down to thinking about discussion. You don't have to go to a conference anymore. You can just carry on that discussion online. Conferences, articles, and talks, all the way back around to new knowledge and new questions. So I've heard a lot of examples of people tweeting at a researcher, or tweeting at somebody saying, well, here's a question that I had. You're the best person in the field to know what the answer is. And this might open up a new line of inquiry that they wouldn't have necessarily pursued otherwise. Okay. My low impact cost of this, how many people here have a research website? Do people have websites, either a personal website or a research website? A couple of people do. All right. One of the things I've been interested in lately is sort of commenting and social commenting. And one of the big selling points for a while of WordPress was that it had a built-in commenting system. Well, that's not necessary anymore. So this is Discuss, which I was mispronouncing for a long time as Discus, but Discuss. And once you say it like that, you can actually start to see what it's going to be. It's going to be social commenting that you can embed on any web page. Now, they have a number of platforms that they support. The main one that I want to point your attention to is this universal code. So what I did, again, I'll show you in a little bit, because PowerPoint's temperamental, I took my old research group website, and so I'm going to show you one version that doesn't have a commenting section. And then I've got a version that I just mocked up where I actually added social commenting to it. So you can imagine the possibilities now if somebody goes to that website and they have a question for that researcher. They say, why haven't you done this? Or did you see this paper? All of the possibilities of opening up an avenue better than email, because sometimes people like either that recognition or that public forum, or they want to be anonymous. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons why this might be useful. If people have blogs, they can fit into there as well. But this has been used, this is a little tough to see. This is used on the NPR website. It's used on the Atlantic website, MajorLeagueBaseball.com, CNN, The Telegraph. A lot of, especially news sites, are using Discuss now to engage with their readers. And you can log in using your Facebook information or Twitter information, things like that. But what it allows people to do is to have an avenue directly to you. And that's sort of the best thing you can do and sort of the lowest cost thing. Now, I'm going to do a shameless plug for a Tumblr that we started. Tumblr is another platform. This is, again, looking at that idea of community and how you can use social media. So this, again, is on the list of links. This is columbiascience.tumblr.com. And one of the goals with this is to aggregate and accumulate a lot of what's going on in the sciences across Columbia. One of my experiences was in the chemistry department, not knowing what was going on in biology or mathematics or physics or astronomy or engineering. But through this, what we're trying to do is engage the community to start to contribute content. Because now if we say, okay, part of your NSF grant is to do one of these every 6 months. Well, when they write back to the NSF and they say, this is what our broader impact was, not only can we filter out everything that happened because of that grant, but we can actually get metrics and say, you know what, 500 people looked at that. This was shared 25 times. Whatever that metric is, you can actually report that back, and that's very powerful. All right, so that's the shameless plug. Then I think one of the most important things that researchers can do now that's related to social media and is related to getting credit for things that haven't been posted is to get an ORCID, which is an open researcher and contributor ID, or to sign up for a researcher ID. And so here's the problem. How do you tell the difference between John Smith, J. Smith, J.D. Smith, John D. Smith? You know, depending on what publication it is, they may format your name any number of different ways. And it gets worse when you start to look at international names, and this is very true. So I actually looked up Kim Wong and Wong Kim, and there were people on LinkedIn who had both versions of that name. So how do you know, based on how a journal is going to format your name, how it's going to be parsed and associated with you as that creator, right? And so what these two things do is they give each person a unique identifier. And these are collaborations between a number of different publishers, a number of different scholarly organizations, to assign a particular person to a particular code, essentially. It's very much like your social security number. But now with this number, what you can do, because it's not actually associated with your social security number, is now for anything that I create, whether it's an article, whether it's a book, whether it's a grant that I got, whether it's a data set that I want to publish, I can start to associate this number with it. And now as we start to look at what will new models of tenure be, what will new models of credit be, now as long as this is associated with it, you're going to get credit for all of the work that you actually do. And that's very powerful. These are actually my researcher ID and my ORCID for this. And so because of this, I can go out to different publishers and I can claim articles that I've written. I can say, that's me, I'm that author. And then it adds it into my record. All right, case study number 5. A researcher wants to get credit for things that are not published. So this goes back to what I was saying a little bit before, that publication typically has been an article, a book, a review, something like that. But with all of this new content that people can now publish, whether that's a blog post, a tweet, for instance, a data set, a component of a data set, if you're contributing to something like that, people want to get credit for these things, right? There's been a long time where they haven't gotten credit for it. And so what can we do with that? And this is going to fit in a number of places, primarily in the sort of output piece, but also in looking at what can people then, how can they engage in the conversation around these things? I think one of the best examples of this is you go into the lab to do an experiment that somebody else tried to do a long time ago and failed. Wouldn't it be nice if you knew that they failed at that? But they're not going to publish that they failed at that, right? And that could potentially save somebody a lot of time and effort and money. Okay. So Run My Code is one thing that I think people should know about. This is a website where you can actually upload code in particular formats in R, MATLAB, C++, Fortran, RATS, and more coming soon. And not only does this let you cite the code that you actually use to analyze your data, but it's going to let anybody else take a data set and use your same code to run their data set through. So now people can start to verify, did that code actually work? Was that a waste of time? Were they maybe finagling some things? But you can actually put your code out there and get credit for it. And it's free, by the way. And you get a companion website along with your code. Something else, the Reproducibility Initiative. This is something that's coming out of Science Exchange and a number of different organizations like PLOS One, Mendeley, and Figshare. This is basically a service where you can pay somebody else to redo your experiments, to prove that your experiment actually was what you wrote up in the protocol of that experiment. And then they give you a certificate and they say this has been verified by the Reproducibility Initiative, and that then gets appended to the sort of publication record for that item. And that can be very important. I mean, we've seen a number of things, and this is for science especially, I think, because that's close to my heart. You know, despite the number of scientific things that are published that are correct and true and right, people latch on to the one in however many times this happened where something was falsified, where something was incorrectly reported, where something was manipulated, something like that, and they say, well, science doesn't know what they're actually doing. They're not catching this needle in a haystack, right? But this is the type of thing now where if results are shown to be reproducible, it sort of sidesteps that question. Well, it addresses that question, I guess I should say. Another avenue where you can actually start to get credit for just about anything, which is nice, is called Figshare. I'll do a plug for an event that the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship is hosting in late February about data, and the CEO of Figshare will be here. And on Figshare, what's nice about this is you can actually get ways to start to cite either components of articles, maybe you did an illustration, maybe it's one of your figures or one of your charts, or maybe it's an experiment that didn't work out, or maybe it's a data set. You can upload pieces of your research and actually cite those and get credit for them and get metrics on them. So you can start to see, are people sharing this? Are people using this? Was this particular bit useful, if not the entire article that you publish? This is cloud-based. They make it very easy to upload different things. So there's both a desktop uploader and there's an API for people to engage with their data set. Again, we talked about APIs before, to get statistics on all of these different items. Okay. Another one that's important to know about is the field of altmetrics, and there's a company called Altmetric. It's a little confusing. This is the Altmetric logo. But what they're doing is they're actually tracking, for scientific articles, things that have DOIs and other identifiers, Has it been mentioned on Facebook? Has it been written up in blog posts? Are people reading it on Mendeley? Has anybody tweeted it? All of these things that, how would you know if anybody tweeted it and they didn't let you know about it? And so they're going out and they're crawling, all of these services and bringing in information about the dissemination of that scholarly work. So this is molecular structure of nucleic acids, a structure for deoxyribonucleic acid. People heard of that one before? This is the original paper from Watson and Crick where they describe the double helix of DNA. It's got a 3. So not super popular so far. There's another one that I looked up, Whiteside's group writing a paper, which is a pretty popular paper for people to learn about writing in chemistry at least, got a 21. So you can sort of see the type of metrics that it's collecting. This is another article that did quite well. So 351 tweets, 1 Facebook, 3 news outlets, science blogs. Now there's no way necessarily to assign value to these things. And they're not trying to do that. They're not trying to calculate a score like something like clout, for instance. But what they're saying is now you can keep track of how many times these things have been out there. That could be very useful for funding agencies, and especially in new models of funding that I'll talk about in a second. So that new model of funding is crowdfunding science. This may be something that people have heard about. So another reason to get involved in social media is that when you're trying to drum up support for your research, maybe you don't have to go to the NSF or the NIH or the NEH or any of these other organizations. Maybe you can actually fund your project with donations. So Kickstarter is something that happened, which is sort of much more general. There are 2 science-related ones that I'll tell you about. One is called Petri Dish. One is called Rocket Hub. A friend of mine at Princeton just got a project funded to basically study the effects of methamphetamines. So he was building off the success of TV shows like Breaking Bad on AMC. It's a great show if you've never watched it. Anyway, and so people got really fascinated by this idea of sort of a meth lab and doing research about meth and things like that, right? But what he did was basically used his social network, his peer social network, to raise money to support this project, actually. And he succeeded in his goal of, I think it was $25,000 that they were trying to raise, and they raised over that. And so Ethan Perlstein, who did this, he's recently been talking about, and all of this will be on his website as well, talking about what does it take to use the crowd to raise funds for your science? How can you do it? How do you engage in social media? What's the best way to do it? The first step is you need to have an online presence. People need to know who you are. They need to know that if they're going to give you money, it's legitimate and sort of what you're going to do with it. Okay, so the picture then at the end kind of looks like this. There's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of different areas. My advice for anybody looking to sort of get started with these things is start with what the problem that you have is. What is the thing that you want to try and solve or do better? And once you've done that, then you can really engage with what is the best either service to use, what is the best workflow to use. You don't need to do all of these to get up to date immediately. I'd really recommend picking one, giving it a shot, see if it satisfies your needs, and then move on from there. But if anybody's ever interested in hearing more about these things, my email address is on the handout that I'll go ahead and hand out now. But thank you guys very much, and I hope to talk to some of you again.